The air is so cold it crystallizes your breath and shatters the silence. You have no tent, no sleeping bag, no lighter. By all modern logic, you should freeze before midnight. Yet for millennia, Native Americans thrived, living and sleeping soundly, on nights exactly like this. The question isn't just that they survived, it's how. Their answer was not endurance, it was a masterpiece of physics, biology, and indigenous science. Part 1. The Unseen Enemy. When we think of survival, we often picture a desperate, brutal struggle, a lone figure, shivering, battling the elements. But for the original inhabitants of North America, this wasn't a constant, panicked fight for life. It was simply life. It was a seasonal rhythm, managed with a depth of knowledge that rivals modern engineering. This knowledge was not monolithic. The challenges of a sub-zero night in the Arctic are vastly different from a freezing desert night in the southwest or a damp, bone-chilling cold in the eastern woodlands. The Inuit, the Lakota, the Cree, the Puebloan peoples each developed a unique, hyper-local solution to the same universal problem, heat loss. To understand their solutions, we must first respect the enemy. In a cold-weather survival scenario, the clock is always ticking. The human body is a furnace, constantly generating heat and constantly losing it. It loses it through radiation, heat waves, leaving your skin, convection, wind stripping warmth away, evaporation, sweat cooling you down even in winter, and most lethally, conduction, direct contact with a cold surface like the frozen ground. If your body loses heat faster than it can produce it, you enter hypothermia. The process is insidious. First come the umbles. You fumble, losing fine motor skills. You mumble as your jaw muscles stiffen. You stumble as your core temperature drops and your brain's cognitive function slows. Your body, in a desperate act, begins to shiver violently. This is its last-ditch effort to generate heat through muscle contraction. When the shivering stops, the end is near. The body, confused and shutting down, may even trick the victim into feeling warm, a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing. This is the enemy. It is relentless, silent, and efficient. To survive a single night, let alone a lifetime of winters, indigenous peoples had to master the physics of heat. They had to create a survivable bubble, a microclimate, in the midst of a lethal macroclimate. They did this by solving 3 distinct problems. 1. The shelter. How to build a barrier against the outside world. 2. The sleep system. How to insulate the body from the shelter. 3. The engine. How to generate and conserve heat from within. The solutions they found are a testament to an intimacy with the natural world that we have almost entirely forgotten. Part 2. The shelter. The macro environment. The first line of defense is not your clothing, it's your home. A shelter's primary job is not just to block the wind, but to trap air. Still air is the single greatest insulator on the planet. In the high Arctic, where trees are non-existent, the Inuit and Yupik peoples turned the very material of the cold snow into a life-saving shelter. The igloo, or igluviarak, is a structure of such profound engineering genius that it's often misunderstood. It is not just a snow hut, it's a precisely engineered system. First, the snow itself. You cannot build an igloo from just any snow. It must be wind-packed with a specific density, so the blocks can be cut like structural bricks. These blocks are not stacked like a cylinder. They are cut and placed in a continuous rising spiral. This makes the structure self-supporting at every stage. The final keystone block at the top locks the entire dome into a phenomenally strong, stable sphere. But the real genius is the interior design, which perfectly manipulates a single law of physics. Hot air rises, cold air sinks. The entrance is not a simple door. It's a short tunnel, often dug below the main floor level. This creates a cold well, or cold trap. Any cold air that seeps in from outside is heavier, so it sinks into this well and stays there, unable to rise into the living area. Inside the living space is an elevated platform built above the main floor. The occupants sleep and live on this shelf. All their body heat and the heat from a small quillic, a seal oil lamp, rises and concentrates in this upper dome. As the inside walls warm, they melt just slightly. But the super-cold snow on the outside of the structure immediately refreezes this moisture, creating a glaze of ice on the interior walls. This ice lining does two things. It makes the structure even stronger, and it seals any tiny gaps, making the igloo virtually airtight. A small ventilation hole at the top is crucial. It allows carbon dioxide to escape and fresh oxygen to enter, preventing suffocation. The result? When the outside temperature is 40 degrees Celsius, 40 degrees Celsius, the ambient temperature inside an igloo, warmed by just a few human bodies, and a single lamp can be 30 degrees, 40 degrees, or even 50 degrees, 0 degrees to 10 degrees. It's a life-saving 90-degree difference created from nothing but snow and a deep understanding of thermal dynamics. Further south on the great wind-scoured plains, the nomadic tribes, the Lakota, Cheyenne, Crow, and others mastered a different kind of architecture, the tipi. Many see the tipi as a flimsy, conical tent. In reality, it was a sophisticated, all-weather, portable home, brilliantly adapted for the brutal winters of the grasslands. A summer tipi is a simple, single-walled cone. A winter tipi was a fortress. The magic lies in a component most people have never heard of, the ozan, or inner lining. This was a second wall of hide or canvas that stretched around the inside of the tipi, starting at the ground and rising about 6 feet high. This lining created a gap, a channel of air between the inner wall and the outer cover. This gap was the tipi's respiratory system. Here's how it worked. The fire built in the center heated the air inside the tipi. This hot air rose, creating a natural updraft that pulled the smoke straight up and out the smoke hole at the top. This updraft, in turn, created a low-pressure zone at the bottom of the tipi. This low pressure would suck cold, fresh air from the outside under the edge of the outer cover. But this cold air didn't spill onto the floor and freeze the occupants. Instead, it was channeled into the gap between the two walls. As this cold air rose through the gap, it would be warmed by the radiant heat from the inner lining. By the time it spilled over the top of the ozan into the living space, it was no longer a cold draft, but a flow of pre-warmed, fresh, breathable air. This system created a constant, circulating, smoke-free environment. But there was more. To insulate from the frozen ground, the occupants would bank snow high around the outside of the tipi. On the inside, they would stuff the gap between the ozane and the outer wall with a thick layer of dry grass, turning the bottom half of the shelter into a fully insulated wall. With a well-managed fire and a properly insulated base, the tipi was a warm, breathable, and stable shelter, perfectly designed to shed the relentless prairie winds and heavy snows. In the eastern woodlands, the peoples of the Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and Wampanoag lived in a different environment, a dense, cold, and often damp forest. Here the challenge was as much about moisture as it was about cold. Their solution was the wigwam, or wetu, and its larger cousin, the longhouse. Unlike the hide-covered tipi, these shelters were built from the forest itself. They were domes or long arches made from bent saplings, creating a frame that was both strong and flexible, capable of bearing heavy snow loads. The insulation was a multi-layered system. The frame would be covered in layers of woven cattail mats, sheets of birch or elm bark hides, and more mats. These layers created deep, trapped air pockets. The overlapping shingle-like application shed water and snow perfectly. Inside, the floor would be dug down slightly, and the walls would be lined much like the tipi with more mats or pelts. A central fire or multiple fires in a longhouse provided heat. What made the longhouse so effective was communal living. A single structure, sometimes over 200 feet long, could house dozens of families. The combined body heat of 60 or more people, plus their carefully managed fires, created a massive thermal battery. The sheer volume of the space was small relative to the number of occupants, meaning their collective body heat dramatically raised the ambient temperature. It was, in effect, a shared heat space, a social solution to a thermal problem. But what if you were caught out away from your main lodge by a sudden blizzard? This is where temporary emergency shelters were built. The principles were the same, but the execution was fast and dirty. The most effective was the debris hut. First, you'd find a strong ridge pole, a long, thick branch, and prop it up against a log or a low tree branch. Then you'd lean smaller sticks against this central pole close together, creating a rib cage framework. This frame needs to be small, just big enough for you to crawl inside. A shelter that is too large is a death trap, as your body heat will be unable to warm the space. The next step is insulation, and you need a lot of it. The key is dry, fluffy debris. Wet leaves are useless. You need the dry, dead material from under the top layer of snow or from the forest floor. You pile this debris, leaves, pine needles, moss ferns, bark onto the frame. How much, the rule of thumb, passed down by trackers and survivalists, is an arm's length. You need at least 2 to 3 feet of this light, airy debris covering the entire structure. This massive thickness is what traps the air and blocks the wind. Finally, you fill the inside of the hut with the same dry, fluffy material. This is your mattress and your blanket. You crawl into the tiny opening and then pull a door of leaves and debris in behind you, sealing yourself in. There is no fire. There is only you and the trapped air. Warmed by nothing but your own body heat, a properly constructed debris hut can maintain a temperature 30 or 40 degrees warmer than the outside air, turning a fatal night into an uncomfortable but survivable one. This same principle applies to a quinsy or snow cave, where a large pile of snow is left to sinter or harden for a few hours and then hollowed out. Like the igloo, the snow itself becomes the insulator. In all these structures, from the 30-minute debris hut to the permanent longhouse, the science is identical. Stop the wind, trap the air, and manage the moisture. Part 3. The sleep system. The microenvironment. Building the shelter is only half the battle. You've defeated the wind and the snow. Now you must defeat the ground. You can be in a 20-degree wind-proof shelter, but if you lie directly on the frozen earth, it will suck the life-sustaining heat from your body through conduction. The ground is a heat sink that will never ever get warm. Your sleep system is not a sleeping bag. It's a multi-component kit designed to create a nest of insulation. This system has 2 parts, the insulation below you and the insulation above you. The most critical piece of your sleep system is your mattress, and the primary mattress material for millennia was evergreen boughs. Spruce and fir boughs in particular were prized. Their needles are soft, fragrant, and most importantly, they are attached to a springy, flexible branch. When you lay down thick layers of these boughs, a foot thick or more, you are creating a mattress that is, thousands of springy elevated platforms. The boughs do two things. 1. They create a deep structural layer of trapped air between you and the ground. 2. They physically lift your body, minimizing the points of contact with the cold earth. On top of this bough mattress, other layers would be added. A thick padding of dry grass or cattail leaves would be laid down. On top of that, a ground hide, like a thick deer or moose hide, would be placed fur side down. The tough leather blocked any remaining drafts from below, while the fur provided yet another layer of trapped air. This bed was built from the ground up, with the sole purpose of defeating conductive heat loss. Only after this platform was built could you even think about your blankets. The modern world runs on synthetic, puffy jackets and down feathers. Indigenous peoples had their own equally effective high-tech insulators. Their materials were processed, hides, furs, and even woven feathers. First, the hide had to be made usable. A raw, stiff hide is useless. The process of tanning was a demanding, complex chemical and physical process. The most common method in North America was brain tanning. After scraping the hide clean of flesh and hair, or not, if the fur was desired, the tanner would soak it in an emulsion made from the animal's own brain. The fats and lecithin in the brain tissue would saturate the hide's fibers. Then the hide would be stretched, pulled, twisted, and worked, an intensely physical process until it was dry, soft, and pliable. To make it water-resistant, the hide would then be smoked over a smoldering fire. The smoke particles would permeate the fibers, preventing the hide from becoming stiff and raw again if it got wet. This process created brained and smoked buckskin, a material that was soft as cloth, windproof, and durable. While buckskin was a great shell for pure warmth, you needed fur. But not all fur is created equal. The peoples of the far north, like the Gwich'in and Inuit, prized caribou. Why? Because caribou hair is hollow. Each individual hair is a tiny sealed air tube. A caribou parka or blanket wasn't just a layer of fur. It was billions of microscopic trapped air pockets. It was and is one of the warmest insulators in the natural world, far exceeding wool and rivaling modern synthetics. For tribes near water, the beaver was king. A beaver pelt has 2 layers long, protective guard hairs, and an undercoat of incredibly dense, fine and oily fur. This underfur is so dense it's virtually waterproof, and its insulating power is legendary. On the plains, the bison provided everything. A single prime winter bison robe was thick, heavy, and immensely warm. Often 2 robes would be sewn together into a double robe or sister robe, creating in effect the world's first true sleeping bag. A person could slip inside this hide envelope on top of their bough and grass mattress and be completely encapsulated in warmth. But what about smaller animals? Many tribes, especially in the Great Basin and Southwest, created rabbit skin blankets. This was an ingenious solution to a material problem. A single rabbit skin is small and fragile, so they would skin the rabbit and cut the entire pelt into one long, thin, continuous rope of fur. They would then let this fur yarn dry. By itself it's weak, but by taking dozens of these fur ropes and weaving them together, they created a blanket that was almost entirely fluff. It was incredibly light and astonishingly warm, as it was comprised almost entirely of trapped air. A single blanket might contain the pelts of over 100 rabbits. Even turkey feathers were used. In the southeast, peoples would weave the downy, iridescent body feathers of wild turkeys into blankets that were by all accounts as warm and light as any modern down comforter. So you have your insulated bed and your fur blankets. What do you wear inside them? This is where a critical and often counterintuitive rule of cold weather survival comes in. Do not sleep in the clothes you wore all day. Your daily activities, even just walking, generate sweat. Your clothes, your moccasins, your leggings, your shirt are holding that moisture. It might feel dry to the touch, but it's there. If you get into your warm sleeping robes with that damp clothing on your body, heat will turn that moisture into vapor. This vapor will then travel into your insulating fur blankets. When it hits the dew point, the cold outer edge of the blanket, it will condense or even freeze. Night after night, this moisture accumulates. Your blankets get progressively damper, heavier, and colder. Within a week, your life-saving insulation can become a frozen, useless board. The solution was to have a set of camp clothes, or to sleep in minimal dry clothing. At night, one would remove their damp, frozen, stiff day wear, especially moccasins, and hang them to dry if possible. They would slip into their sleeping robes, wearing perhaps only a dry pair of moccasin liners made of cattail down or rabbit fur, a dry breechcloth or nothing at all. This allowed their body heat to warm the inside of the sleep system directly, while allowing the moisture from their skin to escape and pass through the porous blankets where it would form as frost on the outside of the robe. In the morning, this frost could be simply brushed or shaken, off removing the moisture from the system entirely. This is the exact same principle as a modern vapor barrier liner or layering system. It's a sophisticated method of moisture management perfected millennia ago to keep insulation dry and effective night after freezing night. Part 4. The engine generating and retaining heat. Your shelter blocks the wind. Your sleep system isolates you from the ground. But your body is still a furnace, and a furnace needs fuel. You need to generate new heat from both outside and in. You cannot sleep warm if you are starving. The shivering response that saves your life is itself a metabolically expensive act. Your body is burning calories to generate that heat. If your fuel tank is empty, you simply stop. Winter diets for indigenous peoples were by necessity incredibly calorie-dense. The key was fat. In the Arctic seal and walrus blubber was a primary food. This concentrated fat was a super fuel, providing the long burn calories needed to survive the extreme cold. On the plains, this super fuel was pemmican. Pemmican is one of the most perfect survival foods ever invented. It was made by pounding dried bison meat into a powder and then mixing it often 50-50 by weight with rendered liquid bison fat tallow. Sometimes dried berries like choke cherries or Saskatoon berries were added. This mixture would be packed into rawhide bags where it would cool and solidify. The result was a power bar that was calorie-dense, portable, required no cooking, and would never spoil. The fat provided immense slow-burn energy. The protein provided the building blocks for muscle. Eating a dense, fatty meal before going to sleep was like putting a fresh log on your internal fire. Your metabolism would work all night, digesting that fuel and generating a steady, constant supply of internal heat. Staying hydrated was also crucial. Dehydration thickens the blood, making it harder for the heart to pump warm blood to your extremities. Warm herbal teas like pine needle tea, rich in vitamin C, would provide hydration and a welcome psychological boost. A fire is wonderful, but it needs to be fed. In many shelters, it was impractical to keep a large fire burning all night. It wasted wood and posed a risk. So how do you keep the heat from the fire even after the flames die down? The answer is a piece of technology so simple it's brilliant, the hot rock. This was the original hot water bottle, and it was 1,000 times more effective. The process was simple. you'd find several smooth, dry, fist-to-head-sized rocks. Critically, they must be dry. Porous river stones full of water could explode when heated. These rocks would be placed near the fire, absorbing its radiant heat for hours. They wouldn't be placed in the fire, which could cause them to crack, but beside it, where they would slowly soak up thermal energy. Just before bed, these rock batteries would be carefully retrieved. They were far too hot to touch. They would be wrapped in a case, a piece of thick leather like parfleche rawhide, or multiple layers of woven mats or old hide. This wrapped stone would then be placed inside the sleeping robes. One would be placed at the feet, creating a warm pocket for the most vulnerable extremities. Another might be placed by the torso or kidneys. Unlike a fire which heats the air or a body which produces heat, this rock radiates heat. It was a slow-release, passive heater. It would radiate a steady, deep, penetrating warmth for hours long after the fire had burned down to embers. This single technique could be the difference between a night of shivering misery and a night of deep, restorative sleep. Finally, there is a heat source that required no fuel and no technology. It was simple, social, and profoundly effective each other. In the modern Western world, sleep is often a solitary act. In most of pre-contact America, it was a communal one. Families slept together. In the long house, multiple families shared a single warm space. In the tipi, the entire family would sleep together in one bed. This simple act of sleeping in close proximity dramatically reduces heat loss for everyone. Think of it this way: a single person has to heat the air in their sleeping robe all by themselves. Two people side by side share their radiating body heat. Their thermal bubble is twice as warm with almost no extra energy expended. A family of 4 or 5 sleeping under a large bison robe created a microclimate that was substantially warmer than any one person could achieve alone. This communal warmth often included animals. Dogs were not just companions and hunting partners, they were living heaters. On especially cold nights, families would bring their dogs into the shelter to sleep with them. A 40-pound dog is a 40-pound radiator, generating its own heat and adding it to the family bed. This system of communal sleeping wasn't just a cultural preference, it was a core survival strategy. It was the most efficient way to use the internal furnace of every living being in the shelter. Part 5. The Intangibles Knowledge and Adaptation. We have covered the hardware of survival, the shelters, the hides, the rocks. But none of this works without the software, the intangible yet essential skills of knowledge adaptation and mindset. This knowledge was vast, environmental, and passed down through generations. It was knowing where to camp, never on a hilltop exposed to wind, never in the bottom of a valley where the coldest air settles, but on the leeward side of a hill, halfway up, protected by trees, ideally facing south to catch the morning sun. It was knowing which wood to burn. That dead-standing dry pine or birch would light quickly, but that oak or hickory would create long-lasting coals. It was knowing where to find dry tinder after a blizzard. Not on the ground, but in the hanging dead lower branches of pine trees, or under the loose bark of a shagbark hickory. It was knowing how to read the weather, to see the snow-eater Chinook arch in the western sky, or to feel the shift in the wind that signaled a coming nor'easter. This knowledge transformed the wilderness from a hostile environment into a provisioning one. The forest wasn't an obstacle. It was a hardware store, a pharmacy, and a grocery aisle all in one. But there is also a physiological component that we in our climate-controlled lives have lost. Acclimatization. When a person who lives in a warm house is suddenly exposed to cold, their body panics. They experience cold shock. Their blood vessels constrict violently. Their heart rate jumps, and they begin to shiver almost immediately. A person who lives in the cold, who has been exposed to it their entire life, has a different response. Their body learns and adapts. This isn't a myth, it's documented physiology. Studies on indigenous peoples like the Inuit and the Sami of Scandinavia have shown remarkable adaptations. They possess a higher, non-shivering thermogenesis. Their bodies are better at activating brown fat, a special type of fat that burns energy to create heat, unlike white fat, which just stores it. Their peripheral circulation is also different. When your hand gets cold, your body's reflex is to shut off blood flow, to it sacrificing the hand to save the core. In cold acclimatized peoples, the body learns to pulse warm blood to the extremities, a cycle of vasoconstriction and vasodilation, keeping the hands just warm enough to remain functional without losing too much heat from the core. This is not a racial trait. It is a human trait. It is the body's profound ability to adapt to its environment, an ability that is only unlocked by a lifetime of exposure. They were not tougher in some magical way. Their bodies were simply tuned to the world they lived in. Finally, there was the psychological component. Panic is a killer. Panic makes you sweat. Panic makes you make rash, energy-wasting decisions. Panic makes you see the cold as a monster. The indigenous mindset was one of respect and understanding. The cold was not an enemy to be conquered. It was a reality to be navigated. It was a powerful presence that demanded awareness, preparation, and humility. This calm, methodical, and knowledgeable approach was the ultimate survival tool. It was the operating system that allowed all the other hardware and software to function. It was the understanding that you don't fight the winter. You join its rhythm. You use the snow to build your house. You use the wind to find the right snow. You use the fur of the winter-adapted animals to keep you warm. You use the dense fat of those animals to fuel your body. You do not survive the cold. You use the cold to live. So how did Native Americans sleep through freezing nights? They did it by not fighting the elements, but by mastering their principles. They built shelters that used the laws of physics to trap air and manage convection. They created sleep systems that defeated conductive heat loss from the ground. They perfected materials, hollow hair, fur, smoked hides, woven feathers that rival any insulator we have today. They managed moisture, knowing that a dry cold is survivable, but a wet cold is lethal. They fueled their internal furnaces with fat and protein, and created heat batteries with hot stones. And they shared their warmth, knowing that community was the greatest insulation of all. This isn't lost knowledge. It isn't primitive technology. It is a living, breathing science of sustainability and adaptation. It's a reminder that for thousands of years, humans lived in perfect balance with a world that we now see only as hostile. The solutions were all around them, waiting to be understood. The pine bough, the bison, hide the wind-packed snow, the river stone. The genius was not in inventing something new, but in seeing the profound life-saving purpose in everything. This knowledge is a vital part of our human heritage. If you were fascinated by this deep dive into ancestral science, please help us share these stories by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. More importantly, share this video. The more people who understand this incredible history, the more we can appreciate the wisdom of those who came before. What other indigenous technologies would you like us to explore? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.